What's going on, everyone? I'm here with another episode of the niche features of the app. In today's episode, I want to go over a unique mechanic that deals with the clan of SAR and their floating factory. So, if you haven't seen the floating factory yet and the clan of SAR, you can actually go over to the Faction Spotlight series and take a look at them. And that's where I go into detail about how the floating factory works in terms of its abilities, its production, its movement, and whatnot. But in this video, I'm going to assume that you already have an idea of how that works. So this video is more on a very special circumstance, and that has to deal with the mechanic of a unit becoming blockaded. So if we look at the floating factory here, at the very end of the ability description, it says if this unit is blockaded, it is destroyed. So what does that mean? A floating factory becomes blockaded if it has no accompanying ships with it in the system, and there are enemy ships in the system as well. In which case, we apply the term blockaded to the floating factory and it will immediately become destroyed. This also includes any infantry that the floating factory might be carrying with it, because infantry don't count as ships. So blockading can be applied to two circumstances. The first one is during movement, and the second one is during combat. So with movement, if you were to move your floating factory into an enemy system without being accompanied by any of your own ships, in theory, you're allowed to do this, and what happens is your floating factory would just immediately be destroyed and there would be no combat or anything. Now, as developers, we didn't see any value in someone attempting to basically suicide their floating factory. So instead, we've just prevented this from happening altogether. So you'll see here on the board setup, we have the perform an action step, and it's the clan of SAR's turn to perform an action. So what we're going to do is attempt to just take our floating factory and move it into this beta wormhole system against these two carriers and this one destroyer. So to do this, we're going to have to activate the system first. So let's go ahead and activate the system and then pass on the ability rounds that follow. So now we're being asked to move ships. And if we just select our floating factory and we attempt to confirm that movement, we'll be told automatically that we have an invalid move order. Cannot move space dock into a system that contains enemy ships unless it is accompanied with one or more of your own ships. So this is also true if we were trying to select infantry. So we'll try again. And we get the same invalid move order. So we'll reset those choices. Right, so you could see this as a safety net that the app is employing for the user. I think it's a good precaution to have. I think it's in the spirit of the game to not just for no reason really destroy your own space dock and infantry. There doesn't seem to be any tactical benefit to doing this. If you do think of something, feel free to leave a comment down below if you can think of some sort of tactical benefit. But for now, this is how we've implemented that. So you can't blockade yourself purposefully like that. The other situation where blockade can apply that I mentioned is during a round of space combat. So let's do that. In our system here, we're going to take a space dock, and we're going to take one single fighter. So one fighter, and then we'll go ahead and take 2 infantry. So now we won't be blockading ourselves. So we'll confirm that movement, and that'll bring us to the start of a space combat. And we'll go ahead and pass on all the ability rounds here. And then our opponent will roll the anti-fighter barrage, which produces no hits. We'll forego retreats, and then we'll roll for space combat. So we roll no hits. Now our opponent will roll, and our opponent will produce 3 hits. So, going back to our player tab, we have 3 hits to assign. And if we click on the active system, we open up the ships here, you notice, like I said, we only transported the 1 fighter. And we can only assign hits to our ships, and for the purpose of the combat, the space dock doesn't count as a ship. So if I try to click it, I'll get invalid units selected, and of course the same applies to infantry. So we have 3 hits to assign, but only 1 fighter. So, okay, we're in the ability round. So I'm trying to sustain damage. So this is my mistake. So let's pass the ability round first before we assign hits. Well, the steps can even, sometimes I forget the steps to read. But here we go. Now we're in the assign hits step. And now if we try to select the space dock, we can't assign hits to a space dock, nor can we assign hits to infantry. So with 3 hits to assign, we'll assign 1 of them to a fighter, and we can't assign any more, so we should be able to just proceed here. Okay, so refreshing the screen here, our fighter's gone. And now, all we have left is the 1 space dock and the 2 infantry. So at this point, we're incapable of continuing any space combat because we have no ships capable of interacting in this step. So what's going to happen now is we're going to resolve the ability round after a round of space combat, and when the last person resolves the ability round, these units will automatically be destroyed, and that's the blockaded functionality coming in. So we'll go ahead and run through the ability rounds and pass. So we've passed on 2 ability rounds, and if we go back to our player tab and refresh this system, our ships are still here because we're still at the ability round after a round of space combat. And when we get to the final player is going to pass. And going back to our player tab, we're getting the end your turn prompt. And if we refresh the board, and if we refresh the system, the invading units button is no longer there, and our units, our space dock and our 2 infantry have been destroyed. The space dock has become blockaded, and the infantry automatically die with it. So zooming in on the board, indeed, all we have is the blue player's ships. And that's it. So that's the niche feature of floating factory blockades. So that can occur with the Clan of Sar, and there's actually an even more niche situation where this can occur. There's a faction that we haven't implemented yet, known as the Necro Virus. And if you recall, if we were to upgrade the Floating Factory 1 to Floating Factory 2, that counts as a faction technology. And the Necro Virus is actually capable of, so to speak, stealing or not stealing, I guess, but copying faction technologies. So the Necro Virus can also gain the floating factory and then be susceptible to these blockade instances. But that's something for further down the road. But that's all I wanted to go through in this video. So just keep in mind, if you're playing the clan of SAR, of this feature of blockading space docks. Okay, that's it for this video, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good day.